And now for the conclusion of our two-part series on diseases in the Bible.
The mice, rats had the fleas. Okay, well, what about sunstroke or brain disorder in 2 Kings 4 and verse 19?
2 Kings 4:19, I'll go back to 18. When the child had grown, he went out one day to his father among the reapers, and he said to his father, "Oh, my head, my head." The father said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." And he goes on to say, well, the next verse, he said, brought him to his mother. The child sat on her lap till noon, and then he died.
It's a great story. You know the background about how they got the child. And what would you, I put down a heat stroke too associated with this. And I'll tell you this, and I want you to comment on this. This was common, they said, in Israel in that day and time, especially during the time of harvest, which we could understand that. It's going to be hot weather. They got hot weather. People out there working hard, they're sweating. And but I did put this. I wonder about, like you speak about these things, if you would, about an aneurysm or a stroke of the brain. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think most commonly people think this was probably a heat stroke, which it was hot, it was dry. They probably didn't have a lot of access to water. They didn't understand the need to stop and cool down periodically like we do today. What happens is you get a heat exhaustion, which oftentimes a headache is kind of the first signs of heat exhaustion. And most of the time people, when they get hot and they have a headache, they stop. But if you don't, you can go on, your temperature rises above 104, 105, 106, and then you can have a heat stroke where you get your organ systems shut down and you can die from it if you're not treated properly, and there was no way back then to treat them the right way. So that's kind of what people have thought, but also you mentioned that a ruptured aneurysm, an intracerebral hemorrhage. It can occur in kids. They maybe have an aneurysm that they're born with, or something else causes it, and it ruptures. And one of the first signs of that type of problem in kids and adults is a terrible headache. It's the worst headache you've ever had. That's the common thing we talk about as physicians. If somebody says this is the worst headache I've ever had, that thought should pop in your head. And so when I read this, that comes to my mind before the heat stroke does. I don't know if it's right or not, but he said, "Oh, my head, my head, my head." It makes me wonder if maybe I had something like that.
Well, I started having migraine headaches when I was around 8 years old. Seemingly, a year, maybe it was right after I had a tetanus shot. Now, coincidence? I don't know if it had anything. I've had tetanus shots since then. I don't have anything to do with it or not. And I know I've heard about all this stuff about autism and the shots and all that, but I think it's better that children take the shots. That's just a personal thing for the whole society. You get something just like we've had here, gets too much of this stuff going, you see what can happen. It could have been a lot worse. But I did have that, and I want you to know, I thought I must have a brain tumor until I was on up in, maybe 30 years old, and I had an MRI. I didn't have one.
Did have one.
And I thought all those years.
Migraines are terrible. I had one growing up too. They feel like your head's just going to split wide open.
And I had put my hand on my eyes, like my eyes going to pop out of my head. I told Cindy one time, I said, "Baby," and I wasn't trying to be anything but serious. If dying is going to be much worse, it's going to be terrible. So sick. I wouldn't even look in the mirror at myself after I looked like a dead man, not about dropping on the head. But now, come back to this. Is there association with this, and or what is association with this and dehydration?
Yeah,
heat stroke is brought on by that, or what?
Absolutely. It kind of predisposes you to it. They sort of go hand in hand. Staying hydrated, especially if you're drinking something cool, is one way to avoid heat exhaustion. It's one way to fight it off. Now you can be well hydrated and still have a heat stroke if you just get too hot, but yeah, absolutely.
There's a point that just keeps going up, right? Now, since summer's going to be coming on and you're a physician, we don't want to lose people. We know that dehydration is very serious. I almost died with it several years ago one time. My blood pressure got way down, and I appreciated Miss White. Used to work for the ambulance people. She put a whole bag about this big, one of those big bags, in me from Anytime Fitness to the hospital. And I think she'd already told them what my blood pressure was, And the second time coming back out, I happened to hear her say, and I guess they thought she misrepresented or something, or said wrong. She said, I said 70 over nothing. I was praying 90 to nothing. And I think if she hadn't done that, I don't know if I'd have made it or not. If Cindy hadn't been with me and some other fixed it was a combination, hadn't slept right, had not eaten right, went through the whole rigmarole stuff around it all real quick. And I never did pass completely out. Cindy kept saying, stay with me, Philip, stay with me. She didn't get excited. But anyway, now, this heat stroke business is a very serious thing. And Dwight, as a physician, if you get out and work this summer, and I have done this several times, I've lost there's been several times I lost 7 pounds in a day drinking water. I know that's not good, and I felt pretty bad, but I was sweating profusely, but I kept drinking water. But if you're hot like that, and you go and you pick up some real cold glass of something other than drink it, could that cause a person to be hit by shock or something and hurt him real bad? I have heard that. I'm asking you as a doctor.
I don't know. There may be cases where that has happened. There are definitely cases of people who have been really, dehydrated and overheated, who went and got in a cold shower suddenly and had a bad event occur from that for whatever reason. But on the flip side of that, if somebody does have heat stroke,
you got to cool them down.
We put them in ice. So
maybe that's not true then. What I said.
Yeah, it's probably. But the key is never to get to that point.
Right.
You want to stay hydrated. You want to stay hydrated and keep drinking to the point that you're having to urinate periodically. If you're working all day outside, and if you're sweating and all of a sudden you feel hot and you stop sweating. That's a problem too. You're at a critical point right there. So yeah.
If you're listening to brethren, what he said, I heard the stop sweating. He could talk to you more about that. And actually, just drinking a Coca-Cola and tea, that's not necessarily the best stuff to drink, is it? I mean, it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, but
a little Gatorade along, or
something that's got some electrolytes in it's going to be better. The caffeine in some of those drinks is actually a little bit of diuretic, and you're not going to hold on to as much fluid from those as you would from just water, Gatorade, whatever.
Serious business. All right. Well, I don't know how we're doing on time. We've got a few more. Some of these last ones won't be quite.
I guess they can turn it off if they get bored. But
well, I tell you what we'll do. We might. This may become a 2-part deal too, like those.
Yeah,
but leprosy. 2 Kings 5 and verse 1. This is also a very, very interesting. I've read that it's known as Hansen's disease. There are 2 types. I'm sure you could explain that. Lepromatus, lepromatus, and tuberculosis. I've read that I hope I'm saying that somewhere close, lepromatus, you become, you can get ulcers. It's so bad that it deforms, causes ulcers and deforms, and then tuberculosis also they both affect the skin, it said, things I've read, but it would also result in deformity, muscle wasting, atrophy, loss of sensation, mutilation, things like that, caused by, and you can explain all this to us, a bacillus. What do you want to say about leprosy?
So yeah, this is interesting, and there's a lot of debate about this. If you read Leviticus 13 and 14, they talk about leprous diseases, leprosy ad nauseum. But that term, the leprosy, is used to describe changes on clothing and changes on, I think the walls of houses, and that, which is obviously not a skin infection. So then you say, well, what does it mean then? Because when we read it, we interpret it as leprosy, that particular disease, which is leprosy as we know it. Hansen's disease is caused by a mycobacterium, which is a cousin to the same bacteria that causes tuberculosis, but this is caused by Mycobacterium leprae and Mycobacterium lepromatosis, which causes disease that it's an infection. It can attack nerves and cause skin changes. It can cause discoloration of skin. Skin loses its sensation. It attacks the nerves that affect muscles and causes growths and tumors. In a sense of swelling. It's a bad disease, but leprosy is not terribly contagious, actually. That's sort of it's a misnomer, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, it's not terribly contagious. And when you read about leprosy, I mean, they quarantined people and kept them away, and they had to keep coming back, and the priest would check them to make sure and to decide when they could be around other people, which implies there was something contagious about it. So a lot of scholars have looked at it and think that one problem with the way we look at leprosy is that in the Bible that perhaps there was a misinterpretation of the word back in, I think, the 6th century, where they took the word, which is, in Hebrew is teserath, or teserath, I think is how it's pronounced, and they interpreted that as leprosy the way we think of leprosy, but that may have not been the right interpretation. And a lot of people think that here in the Bible, leprosy encompassed a whole lot of different skin diseases, which could have been changes from scabies, or could have been psoriasis, or lichen sclerosis, and all these other ectopic dermatitis, which is a skin allergy, and different things that may not have been leprosy as we know it. It's hard to know, but if you read Leviticus and go through all that, you can't really make it all fit for just leprosy the way that we know it as far as the infection we have today. So,
and when you think this, and seemingly I read this in Leviticus and all that, it was talking about how to prevent it in the very beginning. There's not as much said in that about the end results of it, seemingly. Is it true now that in the far advanced stages you just lose flesh off your bones, even in hands and stuff?
Yeah, you can have lose fingers where they sort of auto amputate and become really disfigured and that kind of stuff. Of course, the other thing about leprosy is it's very treatable now. We don't see it much in this country. In some third world countries, it's a lot more common and more of a problem. But if you identify it, it's not that hard to treat.
But they do have a treatment and work with it in Louisiana, though, do they not?
Yeah, they have a sanatorium down there that where they have kept it's the last leper colony in this country, and I think they still have some patients down there. Which, interesting enough, they've let's see, there's a book, A Sanctuary Among Outcasts, where a Mississippi man was convicted and had to live down there amongst those that had the leprosy, which they probably had been treated and weren't contagious, but it points out the fact that it's not super contagious like we thought it was. But of course, most of them were infected years prior. But anyway, that's just kind of interesting.
And there is another misnomer, a real misnomer, that you can get leprosy from an armadillo, but that is not true. Now, I'm not interested in eating an armadillo, but I mean, they have rodeos and
possum on a half shell.
Yeah, and stuff like that. I think that's what it is. But the thing is, every time that armadillo give birth, they give triplets, all just exactly alike. So it's a great situation for experimenting. And they are used in experimentation with leprosy, I understand, but you don't get it. There probably wouldn't be anybody left in Texas if they did. But anyway, I'm just kidding, just halfway kidding. Okay, but leprosy is a very, very interesting thing. Now, the next one is fever. I thought this is in Matthew 8:14-15, and I thought, maybe there's a whole lot more to fever than what we might think about sometimes. Of course, I'm sure Dwight, as a physician, can attest to this, but we think about fever, it's just simply stated, it's a rise of body temperature, but it's a warning. It is a warning that something somewhere is wrong. I added that, but I believe that's the case. But I think in this reading here, we'll read it, this may be malaria. I think that's what a lot of the Bible scholars think, that it was malaria, the great fever. It it's sometimes the Bible talks about the burning ague of Leviticus 26:16, extreme burning in Deuteronomy 28, but malaria, as we know, it was translated or transmitted by the mosquito, and of course people would die from that if they were not treated. But what would you say about it? Do you think, in this reading, what do you think is going on there in Matthew 8?
Yeah, Matthew 8:14. So Jesus comes into Peter's house, and his mother-in-law is lying sick with a fever, and obviously Jesus, touched her, and the fever left her. It says, and she rose and began to serve him, which implies she was in the bed. We can have fever and not be bedbound, but it sounds like she was. The word for fever there, pyreso, actually it literally means to be on fire. So yeah, I think malaria is definitely a candidate. It's they were not far from the Nile region, and there have been problems with malaria in that part of the world for a long time. So that was a possibility. Could have been an early case of influenza. It could be you could get fever from cancers. You can get there's something called familial Mediterranean fever, which is an inflammatory disease that causes fever, and it's common in people of Jewish descent, especially in that part of the world. It's not very, I say common, it's not super common, but if you do find it, that's one of the places that you can see it. So you can have other autoimmune diseases. You think it was more than just a cold that made her a little febrile. I mean, she had something serious going on. But if I had to put my money on it, I'd probably say malaria was at the top of the list. I agree.
Well, evidently, it's pretty serious that he must have thought that she was not going to live. But Jesus did take care of it. Well, it's interesting that what we find out about fever. It's not, but it is something I think most of you all as physicians, if you see somebody that would have a persistent fever for several days, you'd be very concerned. You've got to find out what it is. I remember back in around 1986, I was in Ridley, Alabama, and one of our fine members, a lady, she kept having a low-grade fever, and she was in Eliza Coffin Memorial there in Florence, and they finally told the family, it's been several days, they said, look, we're going to have to do exploratory surgery. Something's wrong, we don't know what it is. And when they did, her colon had ruptured. And they said if she could live 6 weeks, they thought she could make it. She died on that 6-week day. Really wonderful lady. But she had also had a breathing problem, I think, and they had her taking a steroid. What's the big steroid that everybody?
Prednisone.
Prednisone. And they said that prednisone, I could not understand for a long time, man, if your colon ruptured inside you, that ought to hurt, wouldn't it? Would you feel that? But they said that prednisone was strong enough to mask that. She was an older woman.
Yeah.
She was up in her high 70s, but she never felt it. Or she didn't. But anyway, fever is a serious thing.
Fever is is a side effect of your body's response to something.
Trying to kill it, I guess.
It's trying to kill you. Actually, your immune system works better when your body temperature is raised just a little bit. So fever in and of itself, unless it gets really high, like in the heat stroke situation, is not harmful. It's but it's telling you that something's wrong.
Something's wrong.
Yeah. So.
And you need to see somebody.
You need to see somebody. There's a whole there's something in the medical world. Fever of unknown origin. We learn a lot about that in our training. There's a different list of things for kids. There's a different list of things in adults. There's some overlap, but when you have somebody that's just running fever, you got to go find out where it's coming from, and there's a process we go through to try to sort that out. So she may have had.
No doubt what?
Who knows?
It's interesting to know how people jump to things. There is a such thing known as a fever tree. A fever tree. And it's in the Middle East. And they say that people that live where those trees are, they don't have fever. I have a hard time, I believe there's a fever tree, but I have a hard time believing they don't have fever, but I don't know. There's something to do with the tree that keeps them having fever. I think that's a big stretch. Wouldn't you think that's a big stretch, or what would you think? I believe in herbs and things like that.
Well, aspirin is the chemical of aspirin is derived from the willow tree, which is an antipyretic. So
white willow, I think it's yeah. Well, maybe there is something that fever tree. All right. Well, we're getting close now. Chronic hemorrhaging, and this may be. I'm sure you've seen a number of these things. I guess you have as a physician. But chronic hemorrhaging, we're familiar with Matthew 9:20, if you want to read it.
And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him, meaning Jesus, and touched the fringe of his garment, for she said to herself, if only I touch his garment, I will be made well.
You know, in that day and time, if you had this today, and a woman was having this flow of blood like this, and she becomes anemic, you might, if it is something like a fibroid tumor or something like that, you could correct it. They couldn't do that in that day and time. And this woman had that 12 years. Don't you know she had a big medical bill, and it was very hard on her. But what would you want to say about that?
Yeah, you know, I guess first of all, we've always assumed maybe because it was a woman that it was a menstrual type bleeding disorder, which could be from a fibroid tumor or various other causes of abnormal bleeding. It could have been a gastrointestinal issue. You can get a chronic dysentery where you have chronic diarrhea that leads to bleeding. You can have, we have inflammatory bowel disease, which is Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis that can cause recurrent episodes of, bleeding from the bowels and that kind of stuff. And they're chronic conditions, they don't go away. So we don't know for sure. I think it probably was a menstrual thing. And she probably wasn't bleeding constantly or she wouldn't have survived 12 years, but it was obviously something that kept coming back. And she was probably very anemic and felt terrible, and this was a life-threatening condition, I'm sure, by this point, for her. So,
it's sad that in some things like this, that you can't talk about some subjects. They think. I was raised in a home where my mother taught us, when you use the restroom, the number 2, you take a look, you take care of your business, go on. If you see any blood in it ever, you let me know. I'm thinking that a lot of people's lives probably could have been saved if they took a look at it. Oh, it's not a great thing to look at, but if you see blood in your stool, you need to see a doctor pretty quick, don't you? In most cases, that's not necessarily. It could be some other things, hemorrhoid or something, but.
Yeah, that's it. If you have one and never occurs again, okay, but that's something you need. It's amazing. I have a lot of patients that if you talk, if you bring up going through things, they say, "Well, I never look." I'm surprised. But yeah, because it's important, and that is something that you need to have checked out.
That thing is ridiculous in our society because that's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It can be a sign.
And you're not working for a business. You got all the business you can deal with. I know you as a physician, it's hard to get in to see why he's a good doctor. But really and truly, and so many things like that I have been told since I was grown. That, hey, if we had just known this to start with, we could take care of this.
Sure.
But if you don't know, there's always a point too late. Okay, well, we got 2 more. Blindness in Mark 10:46. I thought this was very interesting. Blindness. In fact, both of these last 2. Of course, we understand blindness is loss of sight. If you want to read that and comment, what do you think that might be? And I'll tell you what I see.
Mark 10:46. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. So, this one doesn't really say how long he'd been blind, whether this was something that had come on in adulthood or whether he was born that way. Blindness was a lot more common at this time, and in certain parts of the world even now it's more common than it is here, and primarily because of 2 infections. One is called trachoma. It's caused by a bacteria called Chlamydia trachomatis that gets in the eyes and eventually leads to blindness. It's easily treated if you catch it, but it can progress and cause blindness really at any age, and there are places where it's just has been just widespread. So this may have been what he had. The other, the most common cause of blindness from birth, which there's another verse where he talks about the person being blind from birth. It's also caused by a bacteria, and it's the bacteria that causes gonorrhea. It's a sexually transmitted disease, and it's transmitted to the baby as they're coming through the birth canal. That's the reason where every infant now, when they're born, they get a antibiotic goo put in their eyes immediately just for that, and then you're done. You don't have to worry about it. So we don't really see that anymore. But not in first world countries. But those are the two big ones, and then there are other common causes that could occur. So
I'm not trying to be vulgar. You probably know what I'm about to say. But the old saying, I said it in a very nice Christian way, but maybe it'd be something that'll help somebody. Having unlawful sexual relations can cause you to lose your eyesight. Now that's not the way I heard it as a child. A young person, do this and you'll go blind. But now, in all honesty, there is some truth to that.
There's some truth.
There's some big time truth. Here's a physician sitting right here. I'm a minister. There is great truth in that, but that's what's a lot of Bible scholars seem to think that was the cause of that one, the latter part, the gonorrhea.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, now who can know for sure? But he's a grown man, and there's not any indication he was blind from birth. We know people can lose their eyesight because of a lot of things. Diabetes is a big thing. Cataracts is another thing, and I don't think either one of those has anything to do with the other thing we were talking about. But so anyway.
Some of the causes of blindness, adulthood blindness that we see now, you didn't see a lot at this point in time because they occur later in life, or they're caused by diseases that don't allow you to live long enough if they're not treated to get blind. Other things get diabetics back then didn't really necessarily live long enough to get blind a lot of times, so it's hard to know. I thought it was interesting, Jesus, there's 3 episodes of him healing blindness, and he did it 3 different ways.
Yeah. What does that indicate to you? Anything special? Does that make you think that maybe there's 3 different causes or something? You go ahead and say what you're going to say.
No, I think it's just kind of, I don't know, it's almost like just whatever kind of mood he was in. One of them he spoke to, another one he touched, and another one he mixed up some spittle and mud and put it on their eyes, and they all wind up in the same way. It's sort of like Naaman go, get in the Jordan. I don't know, his ways are mysterious, and I don't think we're meant to understand them. But there wasn't any magic potion for him healing blindness other than his power, and beyond that, you can't read too much into it, I don't think.
We got one more paralysis, but the one that we talked about with Hezekiah about the boils and the figs, one ancient writer said that this was one of the great references that gave rise to people needing to see a physician, that you need to be treated. That's all right. That makes sense. Understand. All right, Acts 8:7, last one, paralysis. I think sometimes this is referred to in the old King James as palsy, but the word, if you look it up in the dictionary, of course Dwight knows this, paralysis is just being made feeble in some way by a paralytic stroke, but it's relating to or resembling to paralysis, palsy. But what do you think was going on there?
Yeah, let's see, Acts 8:7. For unclean spirits crying out with a loud voice came out of many who had them, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. Paralyzed, the Greek word was paralio or paralio, which means weak of limb, and the lame is kolos, which means maimed. So, you can have a paralysis that affects your bottom half. You can have a paralysis of one limb or one part of a limb. People, and there's a difference between being paralyzed maybe from birth and it occurring later on in life. You can be born with birth defects of the spinal cord that lead to paralysis. You can have some sort of lack of oxygen during birth that leads to a cerebral palsy, where you have different parts of the body that don't work right. In adulthood, if you become paralyzed, a stroke, some sort of trauma. But a big one, we talked a lot about infectious diseases, a big one was probably polio. We don't see that as much now as we used to, but polio can do it. It can affect certain limbs, a hand or a leg or more than that. It's hard to know. Some of these could have been soldiers who had fought and had an injury. We just we don't know.
But it was a really bad thing, though, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. I have patients now who have after effects from having had polio back prior to the vaccines that we all get now. They still suffer from some of the after effects. They live, but they have problems in a leg or a foot or something like that. So, and it was a lot more rampant then than it is now. Syphilis can cause neurological problems and lead to that sort of thing too. Speaking of those types of diseases.
But those are real diseases in people, and I would encourage any of our folks here, you need to find a good way. If you have to talk to a doctor or somebody, you've got children, you have children, these things are here. What, syphilis, gonorrhea, things like that. And I'm certain to say that, and you correct me, they can be transmitted rather easily if people do things they should not be doing. The Christian life is the great life to live a good, healthy, long life, hopefully. Now, if we draw, I'd like you to draw first one spiritual statement, whatever you think from any of this that we've studied. I'll add one too. What would you say about this, having looked at these things? The Bible says whatever things written aforetime written there for our learning, that we through patience and hope of the Scriptures, or patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. What would be a spiritual application you would make to any or all of this? Would you broaden or whatever? What would you say as a physician?
I'll comment from back on the paralysis. This is one thing that occurred to me. A disease that I didn't mention just a second ago, but ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, which causes paralysis. I got to thinking about this because I just recently read a book. It's called The Last Ride of the Iron Horse. It's about Lou Gehrig and how he tried to fight through his disease and his last baseball season and some remarkable things he was able to do. But anyway, I think it was 1939 at Lou Gehrig's day, when he knew he was dying. He stood in front of everybody and he said, "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." You know, it's an iconic statement that a lot of sports fans know about. But I got to thinking about, this guy, people who were paralyzed, and Jesus or one of the apostles healed them, and they got up, and you talk about feeling like the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Think about how these guys really felt, where they're faced with some sort of permanent paralysis, maybe a progressive one like Lou Gehrig's disease, because they could have had something like that, and they're healed and they're whole. So from a physician standpoint, you think about the great physician, and it doesn't matter what you have in this life, you're going to be healed in the next one if you do what you're required to do. So there's a lot of terrible things, but in the end, you can all be the luckiest person on the face of the earth, so to speak. So that was something that popped in my head as I was thinking about this.
Well, I'd add to this to help maybe complement what you're saying. I think all of this shows us, all of these things, that we, mainly this, we need to be careful in our lives, and we need to exercise precaution, and we need, as far as a spiritual application, the Bible tells us that sin leads to death. Sin is a spiritual sickness, like we have talked about all these physical ailments or sicknesses, and so if you don't take care of your ailment, if you don't take care of your sin, you will die. Physically, in most cases, or spiritually, you'll die. And I believe God has put everything here on this earth, even things like this, to help us to learn to trust Him. Really to trust Him. Parents ought to talk to their children about what to watch for as good health and things like that, And people should use doctors. People sometimes have little crap things to say about preachers and doctors and lawyers and things like that. But I tell you what, I'm glad that we got them. And if you need one on occasion, I'm glad there's one there. We're so blessed to live in a country today where we've got doctors. This hospital out here, I understand, is maybe one of the very best in the state of Mississippi when it comes to dealing with strokes. Would you use the word protocol or their procedure with strokes? It's one of the very best in the state of Mississippi, right here in Amory, Mississippi. And we've got it up here on the wall down here on one of the bulletin boards, things to watch out about a stroke. But strokes can be very common. I mean, they are very common, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And they can be very detrimental to us, even fatal. But these things are here to help us. I think this is here more than just to let us know about physical things that's going on. It's here to help us to do what Jesus said, watch and pray. I want to thank you so much.
I enjoyed it.
I felt like you could add a great deal because of your fact that you are a physician, and we do believe you're a really good physician. And we appreciate your time, and George appreciates you. And let's close with a word of prayer, and Dwight, would you like to lead us in prayer?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you, and Lord, we just ask you to be with us and help us to do like we've done today in searching the scriptures for anything that we can find to help us in this life and help us to one day be with you in heaven. Lord, we ask that you help us to lead a Christian life and live the example that your Son Jesus set for us, Lord. And we have many in our number and elsewhere who are sick and struggling with various kinds of diseases, some that we've mentioned today, and others that are so numerous and too numerous to mention today, Lord. But you know their needs, and we ask that you give them comfort and you give them healing, and we ask that you help us to all remember the healing power of the great physician, and to do what we need to do to be with him one day. And we pray through Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. This is probably going to have to be a two-parter, isn't it?